For those of you who don't know, and I welcome to any new faces here tonight, I am Julie Luton. I am the president of the McKinney Area Democratic Club. We are very grateful that you are here tonight. This particular meeting is to, I'll let Sissy introduce our special guest, but we are here to talk about interesting things in the legislature and then follow up with what our club, our organization itself will be doing in the near future, right after the elections are over on May 1st and whatever runoffs we happen to have. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. And let me introduce you to Sissy Oldner, who is our program's chair, and she'll take it over from here for the first half of the program.
Hi, everybody. Please bear with me. My internet went out like literally 3 minutes ago, and I'm on a hotspot. So, Julie, you may have to take over if it gets glitchy. So I apologize for that. But I am so excited to have everybody here for our first official membership meeting of the McKinney Area Democrats, and I could not ask for a better speaker than Chris Tackett. I became acquainted with Chris when a friend of mine was running for office. And Chris had been digging up a lot of information about where the money was coming from for opponents of my friend and of Judge Becker. And anyway, I started following him on Twitter, ended up meeting he and Mindy, and they came to a meeting here in McKinney. And Chris he has a corporate life and a corporate job, but he's also been, he was elected to the school board in Granbury, which is how he started to learn about the dark money in politics and where all the bodies are buried. He has been a resource and a source for the Texas Tribune, the Dallas Morning News, Houston Chronicle, the Austin American Statesman. A lot of people follow him and to see his spreadsheets, to see his fancy graphs, because he breaks it all down in a way that it makes sense for the layperson to understand where the true motives are in politics. So with that said, I will turn it over to Chris.
All right, well, thank you, Sissy. That was very nice. I appreciate it. Hey, thank you everybody for being here to listen. Know that I'm not gonna probably go as deep as some of you might like into money, because it is there, and look, I can take you through. If you go to christackettnow.com, I have updated the campaign finance tracking from the 2020 election cycle, and I pulled in the entire database from the Texas Ethics Commission to where you can find local PACs that I never had tracked before. You can find, or not local PACs, but any PAC that's registered with the state and filing, it's out there. Tons more candidates, tons more information. Yeah, christackettnow.com. But it's the 2020 election cycle is the only one I have had the opportunity to do. I will go backwards and try and catch a few more as we go forward. But what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today is give you a sense of what I've seen going on in the Tex Ledge. There's some, we didn't flip the House, so it makes it harder to make real progress in some places. But there've been some really good bills filed. There's been some awful bills filed. So we're going to touch on that for just a minute, but then I'm going to dig into what's behind some of the awful bills and kind of run you through that and understand how it's related to all the money that I've been tracking in the past. So when we think about what's going on in this legislative session, the reality is we are still too early to know what's really going to make it through. We are still, the way the legislature works, you have to have the bill filed. Usually there's one on the House side and the Senate side, and they both try and pass them. And if it passes one side or the other, they decide if they want to accept the other one, and they throw amendments and all this back and forth. It's a little ridiculous, but we are absolutely still in the middle of it. We hit the end of session in late May, and that's really those last couple of weeks is where you see the real haggling going on. We are seeing things come out of committees. We are seeing certain things get to the floor of the House or the Senate. We are seeing a handful of things pass, but they've only passed on one side or the other, right? We haven't seen anything actually get all the way through both houses. There have been some really good bills filed. I mean, things on elections, making, early voting expanding, looking at racial justice, criminal justice, and again, there's a whole series of bills. I mean, bills to decriminalize marijuana in the state have been put forth by a couple of different folks. When we talk about education, bills to, eliminate the STAR test, to remove high stakes testing, healthcare stuff, reproductive healthcare, trying to actually preserve abortion rights, preserve, stop discrimination against LGBTQ. But the reality is all of these things have been filed by Democrats, right? All of those good bills that I just rattled off, and again, there's a whole list of numbers. There's tons of them that have been filed that, from everything I'm seeing, aren't going anywhere, right? Because we don't have control of the Texas House or the Texas Senate. We're in a much worse place in the Senate. A lot of these great bills get put forth and they're either dying in committee or are not even getting scheduled, right, inside those spaces. We're hearing some, right? I mean, there is some performative stuff going on. The only thing that I'll say I've really seen filed by a Democrat that looks like it's actually got momentum, that's going to go through, is Senate Bill 298, which was filed by Nathan Johnson. And 298 would allow permanently the pickup and delivery of alcoholic beverages, right? That is something that apparently both sides can agree on. Maybe we should be doing more of that, right? We had some of that with, with the COVID. It's trying to make it permanent. When you look on the bad side, that's the good side, right? The bad side of things, I mean, look, we've got some awful stuff out there. We know permitless carry, right, passed the Texas House and even picked up some Democratic votes on that one. I mean, absolutely shocking to me when you see all the groups who have come out saying that's insane. And it's one of those, when it passed the House, the thinking was, well, shoot, that sucker's going to sail through the Senate, and Abbott's going to sign it. Well, the noise that you're hearing is that Patrick doesn't think he has the votes to pass it, which is a little weird because you would have assumed that would have sailed right through. But there are those who are probably the most extreme in the Senate are trying to find ways around through different committees or different versions of things, trying to get it out there. So permitless carry is absolutely out there. There have been multiple horrible bills looking to restrict voting, basically trying to counteract the fraud that doesn't exist right out there, all doing things to try and make it harder for people to vote. And the reality is they want to make it harder for Democrats to vote, right? I mean, that's one. How do you control power? You have less and less people voting, and you make sure the only ones voting are the ones who back you, right, wherever you can. So multiple of those things have been out there. The good thing is you are seeing and a whole series of these companies are speaking out saying this isn't a good thing, right? Permitless carry, you're hearing lots of groups coming out against it. When you look at things like the voting restrictions, we've got companies coming out and speaking against it. They saw what happened in Georgia, right? And we don't want to get caught behind it here in Texas. So the companies have seen some of that. They've spoken out about it. You want to talk about restrictions on abortion being put forth in the Texas legislature. I mean, there have been proposals to ban abortion at 12 weeks, ban abortion at 6 weeks, ban abortion should Roe v. Wade be overturned by the Supreme Court. All of those things are out there. In a lot of cases, some of these are, again, performative, right? They're filed to drive the Overton window further to the right, and then death by 1,000 cuts do things that maybe you pass something that's not as insane, but it is still restricting a woman's right to choose, right? And so those things are absolutely out there, and we have to be wary of them. There's too many bill numbers for me to give you one or two. There's like 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, all doing basically the same sorts of things. We've got, of course, what always is out there. It's discrimination against the LGBTQ community. There has absolutely been a whole series of bills filed discriminating against transgender kids right? Competing in athletics. That's basically another redo of bathroom bills from 2 sessions ago. Those things are out there and being pushed. There's even been legislation proposed that would punish companies who speak out against the legislation that they're trying to push, right? I mean, literally saying, if you speak out against this, we would not provide your organization grants from the state. We would not give you money if you've spoken out against bills. And it's not even just bills in Texas, right? It's a bill somewhere else that's one of their pet projects. So know that that is out there. Do I think most of those have real traction? Not really. Again, it is performative. It is playing to a base. And in many cases, if they had the votes to push all of this through, if all of the Republicans were playing ball, they could make a lot of these things happen. But there are still components inside the GOP that haven't completely lost it, right? There are still things they will draw lines at in some of those places. The other place that I think we have to pay attention to in this legislature is education funding, right? We had HB3 that everybody said was the Super Bowl that solved all the problems for public ed. Well, HB3 was a good first step, right? Well, with the pandemic and the relief packages that came through, the very first one that passed last year had allocated 1.2 billion for public schools, right? That's what was supposed to go. The federal government had said this is for public schools. It was designed to help them cover some of the costs of dealing with a pandemic and shifting into a full remote space. Well, Texas did give the $1.2 billion to public schools, but then they reduced the state funding by 1.2 billion, right? Because it was like, hey, well, the money's there, so then we don't have to give it. Well, since there has been multiple additional stimulus packages passed, and until yesterday, none of that money had been actually allocated to public schools. There has been a ton of pressure on Greg Abbott and various legislators to free up the money. It is $18 billion now that was being held up from your public schools. They announced yesterday that 11.2 billion is going to be released to schools, right? And we can thank Lloyd Doggett for that, right? U.S. Congressman from Texas inserted language into this last stimulus bill requiring states to actually give the money on top of whatever it is that had been allocated before, right? So he saw what happened with the first stimulus and the state swapping the dollars out, and they said they couldn't do it. So it was basically required, if our state was going to take the money, they had to give it on top of any state funding that was already out there. It's a good thing. Now, it is set up, the state has decided they're only giving it out in grants for certain things, right? Rather than letting districts actually choose where they should put the money. It's things like summer school programs. It's things like, things you can do to catch kids up who may have fallen behind, which are all, look, they're good things to do, but is it where a district necessarily needed to spend their money? Perhaps not. There is still this other piece of money that has to be allocated. It is one that didn't have the same requirement from the federal government. That language wasn't there in the second stimulus package. So there is still basically negotiation going on with the federal government on what they can and can't do with that money. So we have to keep the pressure on to make sure that those dollars that the federal government actually wanted to go to public schools gets to our public schools to do the things it needs to. Now, all of those things I just talked about that are the bad side of things, permitless carry, the restrictions on voting, the restrictions on a women's right to choose, transgender discrimination, punishing companies who speak out, other legislation that would make churches essential. So if we ended up in another situation where things got locked down, they could stay open with no restrictions. I mean, things like that. They're all related. They all feel like their own individual issues. But the reality is it's like a root ball or a taproot, right? There's this thing underneath the surface that most of us, well, and I know I didn't understand until the last few years, because we see all of these things popping up and we have a tendency to go fight the thing that we don't agree with, right? This thing that's awful. And look, you're all here because you're fighting for certain things and you end up fighting all of these issues. Well, the reality of what I have seen and what people who are way smarter than me have figured out is there is common linkages behind the ideology that is pushing all of these. So it's the same people driving, it's the same thing driving it, and it truly is like the weeds in our yards, right? You can lop off the top of it here and here and here and here, but if you don't actually address what's below the surface, the root ball, it just keeps going and gets worse, right? It continues to go. And that thing is Christian nationalism, right? That is, you've heard the term, I'm sure, because it is actually post January 6th, has absolutely been talked about more broadly. But what I would like to do is probably take about 15 minutes and just share with you kind of what it really is. And so you can understand it's not just a term. There is science behind what it is. And again, people way smarter than me who have figured it out. So I do a longer presentation on this. I do about 45 minutes. I'm giving you a very compressed version of it, just to give you some of the highlights, so you can understand some of what's going on inside that. So let me get my larger presentation is Christian Nation, a looming threat to democracy. I will put this into play mode, which should give you the whole screen. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, look, it has existed in our country from the beginning. It has come and gone through previous centuries, previous decades. It's been in a much more fringe position than we're seeing it right now. When we talk about the Christian nationalism that I'm speaking to here, this is where it ties to dark money, right? I mean, you saw Charles and David Koch in the late 70s were very, very active in the Libertarian Party. David Koch actually ran on the vice presidential ticket in 1980, right? And of course, they got smoked. Reagan won that election, but they realized that their libertarian ideas, which I mean, literally, it is designed to make sure I don't want to pay taxes and I don't want restrictions because I like to keep my money and I don't like restrictions on my businesses, you know, anti-pollution, anti-whatever, because I like to make more money. They knew those wouldn't work on their own. So they partnered with the incredibly wealthy, incredibly far right religious right, and started building organizations and linkages, right? And the people, the extremely wealthy, on the extreme end of the religious right, they like money too, and they feel like God has given them the money, and so therefore they should get to keep it. But they also believe that their beliefs are really the only beliefs, and it's because, you know, God has given them to them. And so their thing is they want to impose their beliefs on all Americans. So you and again, this was fringe through the 90s. I mean, you saw some things, Newt Gingrich and some of these things, you know, popped up. You heard, you know, the moral majority and some of those things, but they didn't really gain a full sense of power. Things hypercharged in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected. Right now, we had a black man in the Oval Office. That mobilized a whole lot of people, and it brought out the innate racism that does fester beneath the surface for a lot of folks. And all the way through that, you know, that presidency, it continued to build. And look, what none of us thought was going to happen happened in 2016 with Donald Trump. And it empowered a lot of things, a lot of bad things that were out there. Now, I always put this slide up, and it's really big text for a reason. When I say Christian nationalism is a looming threat, I am absolutely not saying Christianity is a threat. I am not saying religion is a threat, but what is the threat is Christian nationalism, which is, look, it's an element of Christianity, but it is not Christianity on the whole. So that's very important to understand. But what is Christian nationalism? It is this thing, right, that links being a Christian with being American. And if you're American, you should be a Christian. I mean, it is this ideology they have that totally links those two things together. So it's not saying all Christians believe that, right? So it is not that. But it does assume nativism, right? White supremacy, the patriarchy, that men should be at the front of the family and at work, the heteronormativity, right? And that's where the anti-LGBTQ stuff comes in. And then the divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. I mean, it is all about strength. It is all about God gave us this, and therefore we have to move forward with it. It is every bit as ethnic and political as it is religious. And it truly believes that America has been and should be, as we go forward, Christian, right? From the top to the bottom, in the way we look at our history, the way we use symbols, our values, and our public policies. And they aim to grab every lever of power to keep it that way. And it's not just the federal government, it's not just the state government, it is your local government as well. May 1st, right? I mean, there are people who believe this running on tickets on May 1st that you've got to work against. This definition, and a couple of the things I'll show you, is from the book called Taking America Back for God. Two data and social scientists have written it. It is a fabulous, very illustrative text to help you understand Christian nationalism. But the reality, when you think about Christian nationalism, in our heads, when I say it, you may have somebody pictured, right? You may have a certain group pictured. But the reality is there's not a single profile for Christian nationalism. In the Taking America Back for God book, Perry and Whitehead have gone through and said, really, there's 4 types of people in America: rejectors, resistors, accommodators, and ambassadors. The ambassadors are truly the ones carrying that Christian nationalism torch, right? They're the ones pushing forward. The ambassadors of Christian nationalism is about 20% of the United States. 20%, 1 in 5 people buy into this Christian nationalist ideology as ambassadors. Another 30% are the accommodators. So when I look at these charts that are on the screen, when you look at Christian nationalism by religious affiliation, look, the evangelical Protestants, 40% of evangelical Protestants are Christian nationalist ambassadors. Another 38% are accommodators. But you've got evangelicals who are absolutely fighting against this. So we can't say all evangelicals are Christian nationalists. We can't say mainline Protestants or Black Protestants or the Catholics, even Jews, right? When we talk to people of the Jewish faith, you've got Christian nationalists in that space as well. So it's not religious affiliation. It's not by region of the country. Now, again, the South, we have more than our share, right? I mean, we've got a lot there, but you've got rejectors and resistors in the South. I mean, everywhere. You've got Christian nationalists everywhere in the country. You can't just say it's Christian nationalists are the people who aren't educated. Because when you look, the ambassadors for Christian nationalism, 10% have postgraduate degrees. Another 8% are college grads. And when you look at the accommodators, the ones who enable these other spaces, it's there as well. And you've got people with less than high school who are rejectors and resistors. So there's not a demographic that you can paint that says everybody who is that is automatically a Christian nationalist. But there are beliefs that are the common threads. And this is what Whitehead and Perry figured out, right? That scale that they put together for people in Christian nationalism, these are the things they believe when they land in that ambassador space. that the founders were establishing a Christian nation and just didn't pick a denomination, that they assumed everybody was Christian, but they just didn't want to pick, you know, which version of Christian you were. And again, as I run through these, think about what you've seen posted, think about what you've heard, you know, on the news, think about what you've heard in candidate forums, right? Talking about these things. That our prosperity as a nation is tied to our heritage of obedience to the commandments, that the US has a special relationship with God, and therefore we should declare that we're a Christian nation and advocate Christian values, that the laws and our Constitution and such were all founded on Christian principles. You will hear that over and over, right? Our Judeo-Christian principles, the founding of our country, it's Christian nationalism, okay? That we should return to formal prayer in our public schools and teach from the Bible, right? I mean, that's absolutely, and they'll talk about, you know, we've pulled prayer out of public schools, which is bogus because anybody can pray in a public school anytime they want. You just can't have the state lead it. And they believe that the First Amendment is to keep the state out of the church's business, not to keep religion out of politics, right? That's how they try and go through it. If you've seen my Twitter feed lately or on Facebook, I put out a couple of videos, you know, politics from the pulpit. There are preachers who are standing in church on Sunday telling people who to vote for. I mean, seriously, they'll tell you we're not endorsing anybody, but they'll tell you here's the people who go to our family of churches and who's running, right? And Sissy, I think you took yourself off mute. Do you have something to say?
No, no.
Okay. Just want to give you that chance. I saw the yellow box. Okay. So those are the common beliefs, right? So there's not a common demographic, but there's a common belief set. So if you want to see Christian nationalism in action, look, same thing, right? It's not the everybody who did these things, but it's the strongest predictor that if you're a Christian nationalist, that you very likely voted for Donald Trump, you oppose scientists and science education in our public schools, you hold prejudiced views against racial minorities and show favor toward white racists, basically excusing, you know, their behavior when they do things. You hold those traditional gender attitudes that women should be in the home and men should be leading at work and in politics. You believe that capital punishment's A-okay, and that the police cracking down on those people is perfectly fine, and they should have just listened and done what the police told them to do. And you know, the violence against African Americans, it was justified, right? There was something going on, it was justified. It's anti-immigration. They are super suspicious of Hispanic immigrants and Muslims. They don't believe in same-sex marriage or civil unions or transgender rights. And this last bullet is super key. They have a victim mentality that's characteristic of fascist regimes. This victim mentality is what they use to push the authoritarian BS, right? So it is, no, this was done to me, therefore I am, or it could be done to me, therefore I am justified in doing this to you. So that's where, when you see the bills that have been filed in the Texas House, when you see these things that are done in your local communities, when you see these things that happen on Facebook and the bullying and those things that go on, it's the victim mentality playing out. The other things you see, and I put this in because this is, as we're talking about trying to get herd immunity into vaccines, I have seen this play out over the last year. Christian nationalism is one of the strongest predictors that you're going to be more susceptible to conspiracy theories. I mean, again, it's there. They're skeptical towards trustworthiness of doctors. They believe we rely too much on science over religion, or perhaps it's faith over fear, right? That's where they're going to tell you they're at. They're less likely to support federal intervention to solve our collective problems. They're going to prioritize individual liberty of the economy rather than protecting the vulnerable. Again, think about the lockdown. Less likely to take precautions to protect others from infection. Think masks and avoiding gatherings when those were being asked of us. Anti-vaccine attitudes. and they're going to question the efficacy and safety of COVID vaccines. And they believe everybody's been lying to us, and Bill Gates put microchips in the vaccine and all of those things, right? When I look at what our vaccine rate is doing in this state, it is cratering, right? The reality is we are sitting around the high 40s, right at 50 in the number of people who've received the first dose of the vaccine. Those numbers are starting to slow down dramatically. What we have done in this state, we peaked on March 31st. That was the highest single day we had for doses, 3 days after they opened it up for everybody to be able to get it. We should have had a huge run of numbers that continued and drove forward. We have sites that are closing down now because there's not enough people coming to get the vaccine. And the reality is, when I look at this slide and I look at the safety of the vaccine and such, I think about the polls that I've seen recently. 45% of Republicans say they're not going to get the vaccine. 45%. So this idea that we're ever going to get to herd immunity, we're going to get to 75 to 80% that the scientists tell us we have to get to make COVID go away, right? To where the likelihood of bad breakouts and crazy new mutations of this go away, we're never going to get to. Realistically, we're looking at Texas probably getting to 60 to 65%, right? Still way short of where we need to be to make COVID go away. And oh my God, I want COVID to go away so bad, right? I would so much rather be doing this, talking to you guys in person, than doing this over Zoom. And we can't get there until we take the steps we need to. Well, the reality when you talk about Christian nationalism, just like the money that I was tracking, it's all freaking connected, guys. This is, I did this for North Texas, right? Because I started digging in. The reality is, look, there are people, there's a handful of faces on this, but the rest of this is organizations. It is a whole series of nonprofits that are out there that are driving these Christian nationalist ideas in all these places. If you've seen me talk before about PACs and people spreading out to all the PACs to influence, this is the same thing happening with nonprofits pushing a Christian nationalist ideology. If you look in the middle, you've got this Truth and Liberty Coalition, right? It's a red and blue icon in the center. It's run by a gentleman named Andrew Womack, who runs a church out of Colorado Springs, funded by millions and millions of dollars. Well, his Truth and Liberty Coalition he's the founder of this. And on the Truth and Liberty Coalition, some of the members who are there and a part of it is the First Liberty Institute. It's the Family Research Council. It's David Barton, who lives in Aledo, Texas, and runs an organization called Wall Builders. He runs the School of Government for Charis Bible College, which is also Andrew Womack's and part of his church, right? And David Barton is the one who helped, who is on the board of the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, who wrote the Project Blitz Playbook, which is the model legislation to restrict, they call it religious freedom, but it's really to discriminate against the LGBTQ community and inject religion into our civic spaces. An advisor to the Congressional Prayer Caucus was Alan West, who is now the chairman of the Texas GOP. Alan West was also involved with activities of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, who's the vice chair of the Texas Public Policy Foundation and has been for the last decade plus, Tim Dunn. Who did Tim Dunn run? He ran Empower Texans with Ferris Wilkes, who also gave millions to Wall Builders and the Texas Homeschool Coalition, who gave and was sponsoring the iVoter Guide, which was pushing slanted voter guides into churches, and they do it every single election. That is all about elevating the Christian nationalist candidates. I mean, seriously, guys, this is what's happening, and it's got millions and millions of dollars behind it. Now, this is harder to find because it's all nonprofits. Because these are nonprofits, they don't have to file the same type of information with the IRS. They have to put in how much money came in and how much went out, but it's not who was giving. So you see a lot of these things pushing money into places that we can't really see. And they get away with it because they're set up as nonprofits and they're doing this as education, and they are, they can spend 49.9% of what they're doing for political advocacy and still maintain some of what they do. Well, they'll get around that by creating, they'll do grants to other organizations who will then do political advocacy with the money they gave them, but it's probably the same people on the board helping make sure it goes. That is the crazy that is happening, and that is what is driving Christian nationalism forward. Millions and millions of dollars. Look, the Christian nationalists are here. They're not going away. This is all North Texas, right? You've got Wall Builders, who is pushing, they're doing a teachers conference in Aledo in July, and they're advertising this to private schools, in homeschool parents, and they're trying to get public school teachers to show up for this thing too, where they can teach you about our Christian heritage as a country, effective teaching techniques and early educational foundations. And when they changed, that's teaching the Bible. There was a promo video that went with this that talked about it. So they're pushing this. It's a free conference, right? Come learn how to be a Christian nationalist with us. You've got the True Texas Project. Used to be the Northeast Tarrant Tea Party. Oh my gosh, they're so Christian nationalist. And if you wade through their social media space, that's Julie McCarty, that's the org. Look, True Texas Project used to be the Northeast Tarrant Tea Party, and they were majority funded by Empower Texans and Ferris Wilkes and Tim Dunn, right? And they got so toxic, they changed their name. And now they are set up as basically a three-legged stool. They've got a PAC that almost nobody gives to. And then they have two nonprofits. They're set up exactly the way Empower Texans used to be. They have two nonprofits, which means I can't see their money, right? All of this growth, True Texas Project is popping up in communities all over the state. We don't know where the money's coming from to make that go. Could it be coming from the same people I showed you on the previous slide? They were the same ones supporting them before. I can't prove it yet. But the reality is they have serious money behind them in the nonprofit space, and they are bringing people like Alan West. They are bringing people like Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's dad, who's a Christian nationalist. Alan West is a Christian nationalist, right? They're bringing those people in to speak and continue to drive this ideology further into our state. And then you've got folks like Robert Jeffress at First Baptist in Dallas. Christian nationalism. You listen to the things that he talks about from the pulpit, and when you see him on Fox News and other places that host him, look, it's there, and it's not going away, folks. The only thing that we can truly do is try and understand it when we see it, understand the connections between it, and try and speak up and use your voice. One of the things I have put together is what I call my reference library, right? I'll make sure we'll grab this, that little bit.ly link at the bottom, and we can put it into the chat. I'll take it off share in a second. But what I've tried to do is get all of the books I've read, the articles I have read, the people I follow on Twitter, the experts that are out there. So if you want to dig into this deeper, that's a resource that you can use. It's a PDF with a bunch of links and different places you can go. I am going to stop the share. I am going to grab that link, and I'm going to drop it into the chat. Stop the share. And folks, I'm going to quit. Yeah, there it goes. I'm going to quit talking now, and I'm going to keep talking because you're going to ask me some questions if you want to, or maybe I burned all my time because I'm a little long-winded. But I'm here for whatever you would like to talk about.
Well, I would like to jump in, Chris. This is fascinating, and I could listen all night because I think this is the most important issue facing us because, like you said, it's behind so many other things. But I have a question. why would the True Texas Project have a PAC if no one gives to it? Like, what's the point?
Well, at some point, you will see dollars flow into that PAC, right? So you can't quit watching it. But when you looked at what they did in the 2020 cycle, I mean, they only had about $4,000 go into that PAC. I mean, and it was all, I mean, look, there are the people who are involved with TTP who are, again, regular people. They're Christian nationalists, right? But they'll give $10 a month into the PAC. They'll give $500. But that's it. That's the money. You did not see the large donors give to the PAC. I think what they did is they pushed onto the nonprofits, right? They gave dollars in those forums to allow their voice to get bigger, but not give to candidates necessarily, right? That's truly what it looks like they did. Now you go to their webpage and they've got 3 places you can donate, right? You can give to this one to help us expand, this one for education, and this one for the PAC. So,
but and I have a question about the good news clubs. I don't think you mentioned the good news clubs that are in individual elementary schools. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Yeah. And so
it's. Go ahead. Where you want to go?
What I was going to say is I've always been confounded by teachers that support very conservative agendas. Christian nationalism is why that happens, because teachers, I mean, shouldn't say all teachers that are conservative, but because they can't bring themselves to be political in a way that would support their own profession.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you are a teacher and you're trying to vote for people who support your profession, you're not voting for, in most cases, the Republicans, right? I mean, when you look at the things that have been out there, one of the other organizations I was a part of in previous sessions was Project Educo, and we did scorecards for legislators right across the board, and you could, every single Democratic state House or Senate member was an A, B, or a C, right? I mean, there was a range on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, there was a handful there was some A's and B's, and then a bunch of D's and F's, right? And so there is a huge schism in the Republican Party on, do I support public education? Or am I trying to extract dollars in vouchers or diverting into charter schools, right? I mean, so that's absolutely going on. And the root of the Good News Club is Christian nationalism. It absolutely is. There are some very well-meaning people who are a part of it who may not realize that's really what they're tying to, but it is to advance at least it's to socialize that to be an American is to be a Christian, is to be a Christian is to be an American. It is to socialize that early. And you will have folks talk about indoctrination, and the Democrats are trying to indoctrinate kids in public schools. It's somebody else doing that.
In Collin County, Chris Hill's wife was the sponsor of, Chris Hill's our county judge. His wife was the sponsor of the Good News Club at Valley Creek. Just, that gives you an idea.
Gives you perspective, right?
Right, that's right.
Chris, I got a question. It's Carol Scarborough.
Yeah.
So this is fascinating. The charts that you provided are really great information. Is there a counter chart to this? Have you got information about what the other side is doing to expose, to address, and to organize in a way to inform and educate about this?
Well, the thing is, right, this is all really kind of complicated, right, when you start to dig into it, and there's a web of things behind it. So there are absolutely groups who are pushing, and there are people writing some incredible work to try and illustrate against it. You do have, speaking of the Good News Club, Sissy, Catherine Stewart wrote a fabulous book, right? And she's written a new one, The Power Brokers, right? Which is it's Christian nationalism. So, and so there are people like Catherine Stewart. Whitehead and Perry, who are writing the books and pushing these things. Look, the reality is this pushing back against Christian nationalism. Just having Christian in the title is a third rail for so many people, right? The reality is you're talking about religion, and that's why I put that slide up to say I'm not talking about religion broadly. It is this ideology. I have no problem with someone who is a Christian and who practices their faith and they do it for themselves. It is when that crosses into that space that now you are projecting your version of faith onto everybody else. And that's what Christian nationalists are doing. But there are religious groups who are pushing back against this. The BJC has an organization called Christians Against Christian Nationalism that is trying to push back against it. You've got, groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation is absolutely out there pushing. So there's lots of individuals who are doing things, but I don't think they're funded in the same manner that these other groups that we see pushing forward are. And honestly, it took the insurrection. It took January 6th for so many people to be willing to have a conversation about Christian nationalism. Like I said, it's been happening, and I have seen it in Granbury, right, which is where I'm at right now. I saw it when I was running for school board in 2014. I didn't know what to call it. We saw it in 2016, and I didn't know what to call it. I started tracking money to try and understand what is driving these extreme behaviors. But the reality is I did a great job figuring out what, right? Again, some of you have heard me talk before, the what and the pie charts and what's happening. It was my wife who started to challenge the why. Why are they doing that? And she started digging in and listening to church sermons where this stuff was being shared from the pulpit. It's things like Seven Mountain ideology, which is wholly Christian nationalism, pushing those kinds of things, going to voter engagement events held at churches where it was the extreme speakers, the Christian nationalists, pushing a fear-based agenda for where we're trying to go as a country. And fear is a strong motivator, right? It pulls people in and it exposes the prejudices people already had. And look, 2016, we put someone in the White House who basically said all of the horrible things that you say or you think, you should just let them out, right? It has taken our country, it has created what was a fairly polarized space and made it insanely polarized politically. It is a hard space we're in. And like I said during things, look, they're not just targeting the federal government. It's not just the state government. It is your local races too, because part of the ideology is grab every lever of power. So at school board, county commissioners, city councils, it's all of it.
And there's just one point I want to make sure everybody understands. It is 100% about power. Religion is their cover. It is their way to manipulate people. And I'm not saying, I'm sure there's a lot of true believers. I'm not saying that there's not, but it is 100% about power.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely.
Hey, B, I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say it feels so daunting to try to combat it when they have a built-in base at the church with the pastors, subtly or not so subtly endorsing candidates. And because they belong to a church, they have a circle of friends. They have, that social circle that's so important and can influence people. It just seems like we're swimming uphill.
And I agree. It feels very daunting. And I live right now in an 80-20 county where I'm thinking 60% is Christian nationalist, right? That's how it feels on the regular.
Right. And my husband corrected me. He said it's swimming upstream. So he is listening.
I think, look, I saw numbers from Gallup just the other day, which I only got notified of that because I got a video of a teacher who was pushing religion into a classroom in a public school. So that's a story for another day. But look, when you look at Gallup, for the first time since Gallup started tracking in the 1930s, less than 50% of Americans say they belong to a church, right? 49% is now the number. That number had been in the 70s just 30 years ago. Okay, that has steadily come down. So when we think about the mountain that it feels like we're pushing against, we have to realize that in some of these spaces, they are pushing so hard because they know they're losing people overall, right? Now, it is probably when it becomes the most dangerous, because when they feel like, if it's all about power and they feel like they're losing power, and losing in 2020 for the presidency was losing power, right? It's access to control levers. It just makes them spend more money. It makes them get more vocal. And it means that we have to work that much harder to make sure people understand what's happening. When you see it, you have to name it. You have, and you got to at least, talk about it so that people understand. And that's part of where I started doing this conversation on Christian nationalism and going through these slides so that you understood it's not just one issue. That's Christian nationalism. It's all of these issues. They are all connected. And if we want this country to truly move forward and be the country we want to be, right? What we strive to be. We know we're not perfect, but we're working to get there. We only do it by making sure that you've got people who truly care about all the people, not just one little subset, actually helping push us forward at every level. It is so important to us. I got two hands up. I see Janet. I think Janet's hand went up first.
Hi, Chris. We miss you in Plano. We want you back in Plano for a rerun. But I did want to bring up, I wanted to bring up really what you were talking about, how the municipal cities, how the cities are being affected by this, because we are dealing with this directly in Plano right now. We're at a 4-4. We have 4 candidates that we have 3 that they're running right now that are directly related to this. They are part of this. And we are fighting like dogs to keep them out and keep them out of power. And we're terrified if they get control of our city, because we know that this is happening throughout the county. It's happening throughout Texas, but for those who don't know, in McKinney, and I'm sure all of you on this call know, but they are infiltrating Allen, they are infiltrating Frisco, they are here and they aren't going away. And so I think the more that you're able to get out into the clubs and talk and tell people, we're familiar with Christian nationalism. We've been aware of this since the Dominionists came really in, and it's really what an offshoot of the Promise Keepers. Is that right? Is that part of kind of the same group originally?
It is all associated for sure.
The same. And so what I remember you saying, I think a year or so ago when you were in Plano, when you were talking about how in the rural areas, they're really having difficulties doing things because a lot of the people work within the school systems. And so they don't want to privatize them, but they've moved into the cities, into the urban areas, and they're just doing all kinds of things here. And it's really scary to a lot of us. And I think everyone on this call, if you weren't aware of this, be afraid. These people mean business and they are not going to leave us alone. So I don't know. I hope you can, the more people you can talk to and explain what's going on, the better off all of us will be in this state. So good luck, Chris. Keep it up. We want to see you back in Plano. We'll have to talk to Quiggle and see if we can get you back in anytime soon. So
sounds good. Sounds good. but I agree with you. I mean, it is, but the thing is, it can't just be my voice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we got to
Sure.
have all of your voices starting to work toward it.
Well, and when people see the religious aspect, that people just think, well, this is fabulous. What could be wrong? And they don't realize that they're being used.
Right.
So,
It's dog whistles that get woven into church services, right? I mean, you can watch a service and 95% of it's going to be just fine, but there's 5%, this little inlay that is driving these points home, and you trust the person at the pulpit, right? I mean, that's part of faith, that this person, understand things. And if they start to weave that in, even subtly, even with a smile, even in these coffee house, well lit, relaxed, chill, we're smiling, we're having a good time. I mean, that's where it's coming in the worst, folks. It is not just the fire and brimstone. It is the, hey, I'm your neighbor. Come on, no perfect people, right? It's in those places you are absolutely seeing it take off. Is it Eero? I see a hand up.
Yep, that's my name. Thank you.
Cool.
And my name is Eero. And first, thank you so much for sharing this information. It's been, enlightening, and you really taken, opened up my eyes to see certain things that I knew was there, but didn't really, like you said, you couldn't put your finger on it, what it was. Right. And to kind of go back to the previous question that was asked, like, how do we combat this? I think as, us as an organization, we have to start operating from a position of strength. And right now, our only strength that we're going to have against their money is getting people and getting manpower. And that means like really going out into our neighborhoods and going into our communities that are in our direct areas and getting people registered to vote and just getting them out and activated. I've just come into my 30s and everything. So as a one of the older millennials, one thing that kind of passed us by was the importance of us really being engaged in politics. And it wasn't until 2008 when we did our first, when we were, pushing for Obama to become president, that we really saw the importance of being active. But right now, there are so many people that are not active in politics. They don't care. They don't feel like they see themselves in it, and they don't really see that impact. That's why you see these organizations like the Homeschooling Coalition able to slide in, because all their people vote. Like, no matter what election is, if we could be voting for a bubblegum flavor, they're going to show up. So we have to start doing that, and we have to play this numbers game, because once we get people involved and really engaged, then we can be able to see things happen, even if we don't have the money. Because we've also seen where politicians have raised so much money and still lost elections. When Joe Biden was running, he raised less money than Donald Trump and won the election. So it's not always about the money, but it is about the manpower and who we have playing on our team. And one thing we have to do, especially as McKinney Democrats, is that we have to increase our numbers, because right now, if we was to go for election just based on who's registered to vote, Republicans will win again, because they have more registered voters. And we have an untapped group of individuals that we don't usually go out to seek their, votes or get them, registered. So I really think I myself, along with some other organizations, we're coming together to try to get 1 million Texan Democrats registered to vote. Because if we can get our numbers, then we become more competitive, and we push people like these out of politics. That's it.
Yeah, well, I actually was listening to James Carville, who's always entertaining to listen to. But one of the things he talked about is, look, if you can go and create the right message, right, really take the Democratic Party and push the populist message, push those things forth, force votes in at the federal level, at the state level, get whatever you can to get recorded votes on, and then hammer people on what you're trying to do to make their lives better. What you can do is move a couple of points in your urban spaces, and you move your 80-20 places like where I live right now, and you move those to 72-28, and all of a sudden you flip a state, right? That's how you do it. It's not, I can't flip everything at once, but if I get incremental change all over a state, all over a community, in every single precinct, I move a couple of votes, all of a sudden you win elections that you never would have won before, or you make them close enough. Now you get people believing, right? Because you have to have money.
Amen.
You got to have organization, and you got to have candidates, and you got to have good candidates. And if you feel like you are going to get trounced, that you have no chance, good candidates are probably not going to show up and run. So we have to find all three of those things, right? We have to be able to get there and move that needle just a couple of points wherever we've got an opportunity. It's small incremental change to get it. And this is Chris talking about what he saw in the elections and from our candidates. And look, I thought we were going to flip the Texas House. I thought it was going to happen. But you saw all the messaging down the stretch, and there was all this money dumped into Texas House candidates on the Democratic side. But the messaging you saw coming from all of them was basically the same exact messaging, right? All of these candidates were putting out the same core, not Donald Trump, not Donald Trump, not Donald Trump. You know, they weren't talking about what they were going to do for people. And they were getting demonized by the other side with radical socialists, you know, Nancy Pelosi, AOC. None of them were punching back into that space with, but here's what I'm going to do for you. I mean, they were playing in the same space. And I think what happened is we had a whole lot of political consultants who were driving a lot of that money into candidates, and these local candidates we had some really good candidates, right? Who were connected in these communities. Their voices got lost, and we didn't get to door knock, right? COVID totally tanked that, right? We were trying to be sensitive to other people, and we lost an opportunity to touch voters. You know, but I think we lost our candidates inside this mix because of the restrictions they felt because of the money and the consultants. And we had a virus, right, that restricted what we could do. But I think as we look toward 22, finding the right candidates, working to make sure that, you know, Eero said it, it's to get people registered to vote. It is to make sure we are making those connections. Look, the Trump voters who are showing up just to vote for Trump, he's not on the ballot in 22. Now, the Christian Nationalists are going to push and drive fear and everything else they can for the rest of the candidates, but we have to get better at messaging and delivering and organizing, and that's how we start to win. And we win when we show up at local elections like what we've got going on May 1st, right? I mean, you know, this sets the tone for where we go. And Angie, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Yeah, so I was one of those candidates in 2020, obviously lost, but I hear what you're saying. And so here's what I would add. I'm working on 3 local campaigns right now in McKinney, and we're seeing this strong Christian nationalism push. I believe you sort of said what I was going to say. Well, you did say what I was going to say. No, which I think is wonderful because I believe as Democrats are not strong enough and aggressive enough in our messaging. We've been too nice. And so they fight with fear on a routine. I mean, I'm seeing it every day in the abyss of social media, and it's just disgusting. But we let them walk all over us. And so I would love for us to spend time. I think we have 2 issues. One is the normal voter who is apathetic and not engaged, like all of us sitting here on this Zoom call, right? They are clueless, and they don't, when we talk about Christian nationalism, they don't even think that's a negative thing, right? So it takes education. And we have to remember that this started, as you first said, Chris, with Reagan and Phyllis Schlafly and all that, you know, that movement way back then, Pat Buchanan, all that. So it's taken them a long time to get here, right? But they have this momentum and we're suddenly feeling it. And I think we have to be as organized, even if we have small, I'm thinking we need a pack here in McKinney, for example, to fight education issues. I've talked about that for a long time. So I believe there are things we can do and be more effective at our messaging strategy. And that's all I have to say. So, sorry.
Sissy?
Yes. Chris, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it so very much. I know we've gone over time. I hope we haven't kept you from anything, but we had a lot of engaged people and a lot of really interested people, and we really appreciate your time.
No, I love talking to passionate people about something I'm passionate about. So thank you guys for asking the good questions and pushing, because we're going to need it. I mean, as bad as it's felt this last couple of years, I think the next decade is really going to be the fight. So just get yourself ready, because we're going to need all of your voices.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank
Bye,
you, Chris.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you